Wrestling Alliance, where we keep real wrestling alive. I just want to remind you that. Um, kind of want to. I think we have to do it every so often, just to remind people like who I am, because I could just be some random talking head that comes up as a suggested video or whatever. If you do a search on catch wrestling, so I have a long history with catch wrestling. Um, I am actually the founder of the Catch Wrestling Alliance, where we try to give voice to authentic catch wrestling, or the most authentic voices in catch wrestling. So we work together. Say like how I often mention John Strickland. So he's like the official lineage holder of the catch wrestling lineage that came through through Frank Gotch and Farmer Burns, and so like kind of like the American lineage there of catch wrestling. So and then also at the beginning we worked with the Snake Pit in Wigan. Um, so besides just working together, um, so like my background in catch wrestling would be like I've trained in it for the longest time. With John Strickland, also with several of Riley's wrestlers. So that would include Roy Wood and also Billy Robinson, Michael Moore. So people, so I actually that's the one thing is like often people like maybe they did a seminar with Billy Robinson and then they're like, well, I'm a catch wrestler. And like, do they even know a lot of these other people who were also Riley's wrestlers? Because also um, after Billy Robinson passed away, there's some people out there trying to make it seem as though like Billy Robinson was the creator of catch wrestling. I think even there was like a famous, not necessarily famous, but there was an incident on this old MMA like news show with Boss Rutan called Inside MMA, and I think because I'm sure he probably would um, deny this now, but he was trying to explain what catch wrestling was on the show, and like he basically said it was like something that was recently invented by I think it was like I think he might have said Billy Robinson or Carl Gotch, right? Or Carl Istas. Later, he changed his last name to Gotch, so he's not related to Frank Gotch whatsoever. Um, so you get all these weird ideas of catch wrestling, and then people are quick to claim to be catch wrestlers nowadays, even though they don't necessarily have the most authentic lineage. Um, so anyway, I trained for the longest time, with the most authentic people, and then the Catch Wrestling Alliance. The goal is to keep this way of doing catch wrestling alive. Um, Even our slogan, our motto, "Keep real wrestling alive," that comes actually from a letter from Billy Robinson. He wrote it to our good friend Osamu Matsunami when he opened his gym in Kyoto. So that's Riley's gym in Kyoto. Has a letter that's on the wall there that was written to the owner, Sam or Osamu, where Billy Robinson wanted him to kind of keep the ways alive. And so also Osamu didn't only train with Billy; he also trained with Roy Wood, and then he since he started off a long time ago, he also had the chance to meet the likes of like Billy Joyce. So the guy who everyone in Wigan is like considered the best from Wigan, or the one of the best ever that they produced in Riley's gym. And so later on, Riley's gym took on the nickname Snake Pit. Okay, so trying to give you guys a little bit more of a background because every once in a while it's good to remind remind some people, but then also to let new people know like what we're doing, what we're about, who we are. Because now I think because of a lot of our work, there's more and more people who are getting interested in catch wrestling. So I just want to make sure that what we're doing is kind of like the way things were done. And that's another thing maybe I kind of want to mention since we know a lot of the old timers, especially, we were in contact with a lot of them even before they passed away. I mean, there's kind of like this consensus amongst all of them about how things were done or how catch wrestling was done. And I think you can kind of call this like the code of catch wrestling, because this is how Frank got referred to it in a quote that he had, that he hadn't learned the code until after he met and started training with his famous coach, Farmer Burns. Right. So it's kind of like there's this way that catch wrestling is done. And so that's what we want to preserve. It's truly like more effective. I'm using it all the time when I roll with people in no gi like all the time. Even allowing them to do their regular jujitsu stuff, and so like basically submission only kind of thing, where it's like we don't count the pins, but they'll be trying to go for submissions even off their back. The catch wrestling stuff works so well, so no need to like try to cater catch wrestling to the modern no-gi audience when catch wrestling itself works so well. It's just like these like right now no-gi and jiu-jitsu in particular is has eclipsed wrestling, and in particular catch wrestling, because catch wrestling again almost went extinct because we have these other things, like these other styles, say like freestyle wrestling. So freestyle used to be called amateur catch as catch can. Automatically though, they took away the submission holds, but then since people want to do the Olympics, they don't care what rule set they have to compete under. They'll just compete and train under whatever rule set is established. So that's one of the major things that helped like make catch wrestling almost go extinct. But then another major thing that almost made catch wrestling go extinct is the subject of today's live stream. It's pro wrestling, right? So pro wrestling used to be just that, where it's like, we in our country, in the United States, and basically all around the world, right? It's like, yeah, if you have a sport, you have hobbyists and amateurs and stuff, so people who aren't getting paid to do it. But then um, quite often, we have many sports that will have a professional version. Um, and we used to have that with wrestling. But now, like, and actually, this happened even going according to Luthez, and also one of my good friends. He's one of the top wrestling historians of all time. His name's Mike Chapman. Together they kind of came up with this idea where they think pro wrestling became almost fully like predetermined around World War One, kind of in the 1920s. So it's been a long time uh, since that shift occurred. Um, so it's gotten to the point, even back then, where it's like someone who um, like can be a champion in professional wrestling didn't necessarily have to be that great of a wrestler. But this is a thing, and this is a thing I see a lot on social media, especially ours, because we try to bring up this point where it's like we're not exactly the same. Um, is that very often people think that just because someone did pro wrestling that they automatically know catch wrestling. That is definitely not true. And then they'll often bring up stories where it's like, oh well, such and such a guy was so tough, um and say like if there was a predetermined match where someone had to give up the championship belt or whatever, and they decided in the match that they weren't going to just go along with the script, and then they were going to fight back, and a real grappling match occurred. Sure, there's things like that, but doesn't necessarily mean that they were catch wrestlers in particular. um and so this is the thing. So I think sometimes, like, because some real grappling took place, then we get the false assumption that, oh, just because you do pro wrestling, then it automatically makes you a catch wrestler. It's just not true. I also I know tons and tons of pro wrestlers, so it's just not true. But what happened was, especially in the earlier days, we did have people who were real wrestlers, real catch wrestlers, who, um, like, say if they were already in pro wrestling, they, to make money, they can continue. I mean, maybe they enjoyed uh, doing, they enjoyed doing the shows and stuff like that. Totally fine because it pays, right? And so you have this distortion of, like, say that again, like if we don't have like the professional version of wrestling anymore, so but there's this confusion and distortion of wrestling. And so then nowadays, so fast forward to now, then a lot of people, like, say if you talk about wrestling, or you don't even mention catch wrestling, that quite often people think of the stunt show, like say WWE kind of thing. Um, and so I kind of want your input, right? So whoever's watching, you guys feel free to comment. Um, so should authentic catch wrestling embrace professional wrestling? So I think it's totally fine if someone does both, because basically since the beginning of this shift to the predetermined matches, we did have a lot of like authentic catch wrestlers compete in predetermined matches. But the thing is, it's like, I think nowadays there are people who are trying to blur those lines, or almost like make it seem like they're the same thing. Or I think ultimately what needs to be done is just to make sure that there's a clear distinction between these two things, catch wrestling and pro wrestling, because again, they have veered very, very far away from each other, even though there's, the similar root. But again, one is predetermined. And so anybody, even without grappling, not real grappling knowledge, they can be a champion. I know plenty of these people personally, and it's just something they enjoy doing. But yeah, even around LA, but also in Las Vegas, other places, there are pro wrestling schools where they teach you how to do the techniques, and a lot of teamwork, and it still takes a lot of athleticism and all that. But again, it's not catch wrestling. So actually, let's go ahead and jump early to your questions, because I think I've already kind of made my point. Basically, let's just try to. My main point is, like, let's just make sure that this distinction is made. Um, and I think that there's like too much of a blur kind of going on, like, especially if, so like if you want to call yourself a catch wrestler or a catch wrestling organization, or um, just make sure that these things are very, very clear, even if you're a fan of pro wrestling or whatever. So let's not just make all of a sudden, not all of a sudden make everyone who's done pro wrestling a catch wrestler, because it's just not going to work out for you like that, especially if you have them compete in real catch wrestling, because they'll lose. Yeah, so Mark, let me see. Listing off a bunch of names. Uh, yeah, more real guys making a living better. Uh, so I think that's the going to the point where it's like, yeah, some people who might have a wrestling background doing like WWE and stuff to make a living. And you think that WWE should have done more with guys like Severin and Shamrock? Uh, Possibly, but again, it's WWE. Then that means you could have had more. You could have them do more, but again, it wouldn't necessarily have done anything for the promotion of catch wrestling. Ryan Kirk, did I ever get a seminar taught to me by Billy Wicks? No, by the time I met Billy, I had spoken with Billy Wicks on the phone, but he was not teaching at that time. Dan Douglas. I always enjoy more realistic looking pro wrestlers, like the ones Mark R mentioned above. Yeah, yeah, and that's the thing. I think a lot of people do like that, or I've seen that comment a lot, where it's like when it looks more realistic, I think people do get excited. I think the stakes kind of get higher. But then I guess, and then there'll be people who really enjoy some of these big falls, big stunts and stuff. Um, but I think it is interesting when some people are doing stuff that looks more realistic. Then I do think I like, I guess you'd have to kind of take a poll or whatever to see if it's actually more popular. But yeah, I prefer the real thing ultimately, but if there's some kind of pro wrestling thing where then they try to promote authentic catch wrestling, um, perhaps that might work for me. But uh, like I'm here trying to keep real wrestling alive, but then people are like, oh, look at WWE. It's like then if they're blurring catch wrestling and all that, so it basically it doesn't necessarily help catch wrestling as much as you think it does. Because then any kind of attention that would go to authentic catch wrestling gets a little diminished, right? Oh yeah, good, good. I'm glad someone brought this up. Let me go ahead and pull up the thing. Mark R, yeah, you watch some of Billy Wick's Carney style videos. Great, yeah, there's some online. But then actually, so the very next comment, Oktane Media. We had Adrian Street to learn from. He was out of Wigan camps. Yes and no, but there's a really cool like a podcast. I think it was like two-part, like a really long podcast where he talks about that, like going to Wigan then he actually has a really cool history about that where then he talks about how many people uh, then say like, oh, I went to Wigan, but maybe they went to Wigan like once or they passed through and then they're trying to claim that they have some sort of authenticity to their wrestling or to their pro wrestling. And I think because he had gone more and he was a student of wrestling, he could quickly tell that they were just faking it. And so he actually calls out a lot of famous people that a lot of people uh, like claim are legit. But so let me try to think where that is. So if you guys want to look that up, he's actually he's pretty funny. He's actually pretty charismatic because he calls out tons of people and he actually makes it really funny. It was someone I know who interviewed him. I think it's called Fightbox podcast. I believe they're on YouTube as well. If not, definitely on anywhere podcasts are. So yeah, so you can look up. I believe it's Fightbox and then Adrian Street. You might want to check that out because again, Adrian was there, right? And Adrian gives a lot of information about this subject that I'm kind of talking about too. Or it's like, so from my perspective, it's going to be a little bit different than your perspective because again, I've been to Wigan, several times, trained there daily, right? Competed at Wigan's events, and also, training with John Strickland, with the American lineage of catch wrestling and all that. So, my perspective is definitely going to be different. And I don't want to be here like I don't want to be like Adrian Street exactly where he's just calling out everybody, but Adrian Street is going to give you a lot of information in his interviews. So there's kind of like this again, and again, it's like kind of like pro wrestling where they call it kayfabe, where it's like you want to kind of keep this notion going, like almost like we call it like a narrative. So it's like what the public knows, you like don't deviate from what's considered like the mainstream knowledge. But Adrian doesn't really care about that. So I'm just trying to really promote like the authentic version. So just so you guys can see that. So even in our like on our YouTube channel, I mean, we have events and you can see the difference in the grappling, right? Quite often other matches that you've seen or the match footage of catch wrestling that's not Catch Wrestling Alliance it looks just like jiu-jitsu. There was a really cool event that happened in Brazil where I thought it was going to be pretty cool, but then when I saw the match footage, even though they're trying to claim like catch wrestling rules, it was just nogi jiu-jitsu. Um, so I think the more you learn, then the more easy it is for you to see. And luckily, I've seen um, a bunch of you guys out there kind of making those comments where it's like I think those of you who are paying attention, I think it should be quick, or it should like very quickly. The more you pay attention, like the more you're able to see what the real thing is, and you're able to appreciate it. And so then you might understand why myself and say like John Strickland, these other people who have this love for this sport, and we want to keep it um, like the most dynamic and exciting and authentic way. We're trying to keep to the code of catch wrestling, right? So you'll understand like why we do it. Yeah, let me see. Ryan Kirk. I love. Oh, I think you're talking about Billy Wicks. I love Billy Wicks' headlock video. Let me see. Drew Galbraith. So Drew is actually a member of our uh, CWA Academy. So if you guys want to, if you're not in Los Angeles, and if you want to learn online, just go to catchwrestlingalliance.com and then you can sign up in our CWA Academy. Okay, so Drew, would you say catch wrestlers are real pro wrestlers because it unfolded from catch? Yes, and that's the way, say, like Coach Roy Wood in Wigan referred to it, and many other people referred to it that way. So a lot of these old timers, when you were doing like the safe version, right? So the without without submission holds, and you're just focusing on pins and stuff like that. Again, those are called amateurs, and so we do have really good amateur wrestlers. Say like Dan Gable, and all these really great names. Who've even won Olympic medals, but again, like officially, that would be called amateur, right? And so then once you wanted to go pro, then that's when you would incorporate all the submission holds, right? All the more painful, all the neck cranks and all that. So that's the way it was. So then quite often old timers would just say, oh, they would just refer to it as actually the way it kind of should be, right? So it's like, this is amateur, that's pro. So pro more dangerous, just like it should be, right? And the amateurs have way more rules because they're trying to protect everyone, because you're just amateurs, right? You're not getting paid for it. So that is hopefully that answers your question, right? So well, I guess one thing to add to that would be, then because we've had this distortion of basically the terminology, right? So now whatever what is using that term pro in wrestling is not, like it wouldn't be catch wrestling. So that's the problem. But yeah, back in the day, a lot of these old timers, they would say it that way. You're doing amateur or you're doing pro. And then yeah, Drew, you add another great point on top of that. The WWE calls itself sports entertainment, so that tells you where they stand, and that's exactly right. And that should be kind of like the end of that argument, right? Right. So Drew goes on. I was a fan of UWFI and Pancrase. I think MMA is a step too far. All right. So looks like Ryan and Mark are having a heart to heart there in the comment section. Let's go ahead and skip to the questions here. Okay, so yeah, Drew, thank you for commenting. So I feel that the catch community needs to create its own identity, create its own shows, etc., rather than trying to fit in with pro wrestling. So I would agree And so, and then so it's a good time to bring up, ours. So like we've had several of the best catch wrestling shows. We had the Frank Gotch World Catch Wrestling Tournament. Also, too, I think we kind of want to start small, especially because of COVID and stuff. But if anybody is near, uh, like Southern California, and even Las Vegas or something, if you wanted to drive over, we can try to schedule something smaller, not necessarily like a big tournament. I know some organizations, like say some jiu-jitsu tournaments, are doing like bigger tournaments, but um, let's try to keep some element of safety, especially since we're having like upsurge in COVID, even though Los Angeles is, dropping a lot of the restrictions and stuff. So I think, so if anybody wants to do a smaller event, so like as I'm saying, like if someone's nearby and they'd like to do a like maybe like a single match show, so kind of like an MMA card where it's like you have like one couple, one match, so two opponents have one match in one night. So instead of a tournament, I think that might be a safer way to go. So just let us know in the comments, or you can also direct message us, especially on Facebook. I think that works best. I think sometimes on Instagram it doesn't notify you if someone you don't know messages you. You can also email on our YouTube channel. If you go to the About tab, so if you go to our channel page, there'll be an About tab. Click on that, and I think that should like give you the email address or whatever. Um, okay, so let's go to the next one. Oh man, I don't know if I can pronounce that. Não tão duro como Pedro. I think that was Portuguese. Today in Brazil, luta livre is just no gi. You are just correct. And that's the thing. It's like, so since the thing about luta is that it is considered to have, and it does have like a wrestling connection. But again, nowadays you're seeing a lot of people, doing like guard stuff and not so much like wrestling like defense. Oh, and that actually brings me to the next person, Octane. Speaking of Brazil, what are the differences between catch and luta? Um, so actually, let me get a sip of my coffee here. Well, the main difference is, like we just said, it's like luta is much more like no gi jiu-jitsu nowadays, so a lot less wrestling, and I think that kind of showed like how, if like the exterior environment, how it can affect you over time. So it might have started off looking more like wrestling, where you wouldn't necessarily be on your back, but over time it's looking really a lot more like your average like no-gi game, especially let's say like if you're looking at IBJJF kind of no-gi game. Yeah, unlike, which would be different from maybe even like a 10th Planet kind of no-gi game where they're not about IBJJF rules, so it's a little bit more free. Okay, Noachinaf. Hopefully, I don't know. I think maybe I pronounced that right. I think pro wrestling should embrace authentic catch wrestling, bring back the golden age of hooking when pro wrestlers knew how to shoot. Yeah, that would be wonderful. The worked matches were much more entertaining. Wait, yeah, the worked matches were much more entertaining anyway. Yes, and I mean, like sometimes I think when you get like um to a higher level, sometimes like two equally matched like people who are fighting for the world championship, and since there's no time limit, then you can get these matches where that last longer than an hour and all that. So then I think that's also one of the reasons why pro wrestling kind of was able to kind of try to make things entertaining and then finish in a certain amount of time. Ryan Kirk. I like do catch wrestlers have a hate for Ed Strangler Lewis, Billy Sandow, and Toots Mon for breaking out of catch to create pro? No, no, and actually, they really are revered by, especially people in the American lineage. So, say like people like even Billy Wicks and John Strickland. These were all people who, because of the time, right? So this is much later than the 1920s. This would be a few decades. Um, well, actually, not necessarily stranglers. Well, since times changed and actually kind of changed quickly, um, again, they were just making money, right? So, in a way, it's like you can't blame them, but a lot of them knew like how to wrestle and stuff. So, in a way, it's just like people who like. So then there were some people that I mentioned often, where it's like you had Earl Caddock or Nat Pendleton, who were real wrestlers and who had something else they could do to make money. So then, when everything went predetermined, um, they decided to just quit. So, um, yeah. So there's kind of like you have two people where it's like, say, some people who wanted to stay in it, and maybe if they were able to make money, then they just continued. Right? But then there's some people who are kind of like, I guess maybe more idealists, where it's like, oh, this isn't authentic catch wrestling, so I'm out. So it was kind of like that. All right, Mark R. Ed Lewis is probably my favorite wrestler. That headlock was legit, and he managed Thez. Cool. I'm glad you called it a headlock because that's really what it was. Um, let me see. Yeah, I've seen Luthez a lot actually. So Mark R continues his comment. He says, "Watch Luthez because he used front leg scissors a lot. BJJ stole it. Yeah, he has actually really cool ways to walk around or to break the guard. Right, very cool, very cool stuff. And Lou Thez is considered to be one of those who knew the real thing, but then also did pro. So for those of you who don't know, so Mike Newton, Ring of Honor does catch style matches. Um, it's fun to watch. Yeah, catch style stuff is very fun to watch. Taquero man, which submissions and catch wrestling deal with rib compression in mount and side mount? Yeah, we call them like compression chokes. So if you have kind of like head and arm ride, then uh, you can envision like say like your rib pressure pressing down on the top part or the upper part of their ribs. You can imagine like pushing your ribs through them to the mat, and that's going to make it harder for them to take a nice breath. And then with your arms pulling their head up to you, so like I said, head and arm right. So you'll have the arm around their head and neck area, and you'll be pulling that up, driving your body down through them into the mat. Makes it very hard for them to continue breathing. So then so it's called a compression choke or a pin variation. uh, because ultimately you pin them, but chances are, say like they might tap out if you're doing like a submission only. Ryan Kirk, what's your favorite choke? Mine personally is the bulldog choke. I don't really have a favorite chokes. I prefer neck cranks over chokes. Um, I will get some chokes in if I roll with people who do no gi or whatever. So then I'll com- I'll do stuff in their rules. But quite often, even when I can do chokes, like all these other things are much more accessible. Like a lot of the um, uh, what's it called? Like a lot of the double wrist lock stuff, neck crank stuff, uh, toe hold stuff, all that stuff. You'll probably get even easier. Yep. Mark R. Yes, it is a pin. Um, and then you mentioned fisherman's crank from side mount. So yeah, there's all these different types of things that's the thing. So kind of like when you talk about a choke, a lot oftentimes in my mind, I think of a very limited thing where it's like, yeah, it's like bulldog choke, guillotine, rear naked choke. Um, but there's so many things you can do. So even with the arm in with headlock stuff, um, so with that means basically with the arm in as well. There's so many cool things you can do, different shoulder locks. Uh, you can transition to arm bars, double wrist lock. So many very, very cool things. I think actually I did a video a few weeks ago where, oh no, actually I think was it this week? I think it was the one this week where there was a pro MMA match that took place a few weeks ago. It was, I believe, it was a women's match that took place in one championship, but I think the woman who won, I think is probably a judo black belt, if I remember correctly, but does like a submission from the head and arm ride that I was mentioning. So it doesn't do a choke, but gets the kind of like the top wrist lock position. So there's so many things you can do, and a lot of times you can get these other submissions even easier, uh, than chokes because I think a lot of people are getting pretty good at defending them. So even like my example would be like, so we had Gary Tonnen, who's like, a really famous grappler, unable to choke his low level grappler opponent in an MMA match that occurred in one championship a few months ago. So even if even the low level guys are able to defend a high level guy's choke attempt, then go for something different. Yeah, Mark R agrees. Thank you for agreeing, Mark. He said, yes, you can get them easier than chokes. Taquero man, thoughts on AJ McKee's grappling? Actually, I think I haven't really been keeping up with him so much. And is he the guy? I think he's been around for a while in MMA. That's how little I've been following it. So I'm sorry, I really can't comment. No watch enough. What is your catch wrestling lineage, Raul? I talked about it at the beginning of the thing. Maybe you missed the beginning, but that's why it's good. I think that's why I talked about it. Um, so as it like I mentioned at the beginning that the our whole motto is keep real wrestling alive, and so uh, that comes from a letter Billy Robinson wrote to my good friend Osamu Matsunami when he opened his gym, Riley's gym in Kyoto. Um, the reason why I'm friends with Osamu is because both he and I trained in Wigan as well. Um, Osamu started much earlier than I did, but again, so this is already uh, like over 10 years now um, that I had been training with like the most authentic sources. So, of course, I've trained with Billy Robinson, but then also Roy Wood, and I also got um, a lot of extra coaching by another one of Riley's wrestlers named Michael Moore. He is the son of a very famous Riley wrestler. Um, the dad's name is it's Tommy Moore, and he also had he 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 fought under the name, or he wrestled under the name Dempsey. But then also I have like kind of like the highest certification from John Strickland, which is he's like the lineage holder for the American lineage of catch wrestling. So hopefully that answers your question. I've been doing this a long time with only the most like kind of lineage holder type people, since also Roy Wood is the lineage holder for Billy Riley. All right, Mark R. Gravit, for example, is just a face bar instead of a rear naked. Yeah, and chances are you'll get the submission with that faster than a rear naked or a guillotine. Ryan Kirk, have you and your catch wrestling colleagues ever thought of a TV deal with MAV TV or Next Level, formerly known as Bein Sports? Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great. Yeah, let's see it on TV too, because there's the most random stuff on TV. It's like what's like cornhole. I don't know if you guys watched that, but no offense if you like it or not, but like even that's been on TV. So um, yeah, authentic catch wrestling should be on in its pure version, like it's the pure rules version, and not some kind of pro wrestling hybrid thing, or a nogi jujitsu type hybrid thing. All right. So hopefully my point got across. I mean, like, sure we can like you can be a fan of pro wrestling. So this is the main topic. So going back to kind of like to the main topic of the live stream here, it's like pro wrestling exists now the way it does, and but yeah, I think ultimately there needs to be that distinction, or people like say those of you who are in authentic catch wrestling or those who want to promote authentic catch wrestling, just like we have to almost like you can still be fans, but you just have to realize and also maybe help educate people that there are differences and they're not exactly the same, and you don't have to uh, even be a great grappler to be in pro wrestling. You have to know their techniques, which some of my friends are like really good at pro wrestling, and it's beautiful to watch them like work together, and it's really really kind of a cool dance. um, so there, there's much to be appreciated, but again, it's still not the same or the same thing, right? And so, like, I guess my point is, we shouldn't necessarily like embrace it wholeheartedly because it was one of the things that almost made catch wrestling go extinct. So if we can like almost like what Drew Galbraith in his earlier comments, it's like let's continue doing our own events, like our own matches, promoting like the real thing, the real rules. Like people have watched our matches and thought they were exciting, so let's get the ball rolling, or let's keep the ball rolling. So that reminds me again. So if anybody's near LA, let's go ahead and any you interested in competing, go ahead and contact me. You can comment or um, um, you can like through any of our social media. So just let me know. Okay. All right. So I think we'll go ahead and end it here. So thank you everyone for watching and listening. If you want to learn the real thing, and if you're not around LA or if you're not around South Carolina with John Strickland, you can join the CWA Academy. That's catchwrestlingalliance.com. You can also join this channel. I think we'll add a few more videos. So basically, we have a lot of videos behind the paywall. So if you want to just join the channel just to support, we have a lot of videos there. We do like um, different things there, or different, like we add additional endings, additional submission endings to some of the videos. We also have a really cool demonstration that we did in the home of Frank Gotch in Humboldt, Iowa. That was actually really really cool. That's up there. So um, yeah. Yeah. So with that being said, thank you for all your support, and let's continue with our quest and our goal to keep real wrestling alive.